So far we've talked about definitions of technology. But now we're going to sort of move into specific topics in technology and also particular theoretical perspectives about science and technology. So today's the first reading of a theoretical perspective on science and technology.
It is a relatively new course. There are actually 5 social science courses on technology, and they were developed by a professor who wrote a grant to start them. And so I think they've probably been around maybe 10 years, I'm not sure. But the discipline of science and technology studies is also a relatively new discipline. It started in the 60s or 70s, and it started because people started to want to look at both science and technology from a more critical perspective.
So the technology that I chose to talk about today is called personalization. Well, the reason it's important is, for example, you're on the internet, right? And you go to Huffington Post or you go to New York Times to catch your news. Now, before the internet became so important, everyone's front page was the same thing. The top news of the day was the same for everyone. It was edited and filtered through by someone, and the magazine just decided that it was the most important thing you needed to hear about. Well, personalization kind of tailor makes that for you. It makes it sort of something that's just sort of appeals to you. For example, if most of your activity online is through Facebook interacting with friends or shopping at Amazon, if you buy a lot of Apple products, for example, the most important news story that'll show up on your page of the news website that you frequent will be something about Apple, or something about beauty products, or something about fashion, for example, if you frequent a lot of fashion blogs or things like that.
This level of personalization that he's talking about that comes through something like Google is a digital era artifact, right? You couldn't have that level of personalization that the internet brings you before the internet existed. Do you believe me when I say that?
This course kind of helps you understand that technology and where it came from. I mean, nowadays everybody's caught up in their lives, their phones, their iPads, and everything. But all this is a modern phenomenon. If you don't know where it came from, what life was before it, you're going to be lost. It's like if you don't learn from history, you're just going to repeat it.
Each time somebody does a search on Google, that means that different people get different answers in their Google searches because there are different sources of information associated with that person, their computer, their location, their previous searches, and that sort of thing. Yeah. So, do you have a question clarifying that, or?
Yeah, it was pertaining to that. I was just gonna say, is that legal? Is that legal to just take?
You want to say more?
My question is, he says that that's a problem, and to be honest, to be totally transparent, I agree with him. But my question is, like, who should be regulating that? Because traditionally, like right now, we have newspaper editors who say, when you pick up the paper, you should see this full spread on the front page. We'll have one entertainment story and one soft news.
Yeah, that was Christel's example at the beginning. Yeah.
Is there a mechanism that you'd be okay with?
Technology is used to mean a lot of different things. Sometimes people use it to mean just computers and objects. And it allows me to see contemporary news stories in context. It allows me to reconsider history and what roles technology has played in it. But I think so far how this class has been useful is it establishes a framework to fit other information that that I've encountered in other classes into, and allows me to structure timelines and narratives and knowledge into it.
I'm trying to do a couple different things. First of all, I kind of have a sense of a progression of thinking that I want them to develop over time, and today we started with the Industrial Revolution, and then we're going to gradually sort of move through time to more recent technologies. So we start with that time period because in sociology it's such a foundational period, and I guess I want students both to have a little bit of a sense of the larger social context for the technologies that they see and use on an everyday basis.
The technology that I chose to talk about today was the history of the clock. The first thing I chose to write in my paper was about the sundial. There's arguments of when it was first created, what was the first sundial, where it was made, but a lot of historians would say Greece or Babylonian times, either around Babylonian times, between 5000 BC and 3500 BC.
I also want them to think about technology and science differently than they've thought about them before. I want them to think about technology in a way that's more analytical and not something that's necessarily good or bad, or something that's just something that humans use for a good or bad purpose. I want them to think, there's also sort of a newer discipline, a newer kind of thinking in philosophy and sociology that's focusing more on objects. And I think that some of that has to do with the fact that technologies are playing increasingly large role in our kind of everyday interactions. So objects and non-human things are around us, and we're interacting with them more than we have in the past. And so I also want them to think about technological objects as something, the way that sociologists put that is to say that they potentially have their own agency, they have their own will, not necessarily that they're thinking, obviously, but that they may have some potential to do things outside of human influence, and so I'd like students also to start to think about that.